Right, so Keir Starmer's idea of compassion when it comes to disability and his rancid reforms to it is like offering you a life jacket with a hole in it, graciously handed to you just after pushing you off a cliff. That's an entirely fitting analogy, I think. His changes to his plans in light of a sizable potential rebellion, though, is to keep the life jackets with the holes in for all future claimants instead. That is basically it from the disabled person's perspective. But with great fanfare, the Labour leader and the loyal mainstream media has declared victory over his own party's rebellion. That these are massive concessions, claiming to have listened to concerns over disability benefit cuts. But scratch beneath the surface, and what you find isn't compromise, is catastrophe. The so-called climbdown isn't a retreat from cruelty, it's simply cruelty with an eligibility date. Starmer's new plan creates a bureaucratic Hunger Games for the disabled. If you're lucky enough to be sick today, and think about that phrase in and of itself, you survive, you keep the money you were eligible to. If you fall ill tomorrow, tough luck. Less money, fewer rights, not much of a lifeline, even if you have the same issues as someone else who was just claiming at the right time. Welcome to the future of welfare under a man who once called such cuts morally reprehensible, but now calls them policy instead. What would Starmer's disabled mother think of him now? Right, so Keir Starmer wants you to believe he has listened, that he has made a grand concession on his party's appalling plans to slash disability benefits. The headlines scream, Labour U-turn, massive climb down and rebels pacified, or words to those effects in the mainstream news. But dig just an inch beneath the PR gloss and you'll discover a policy still reeking of cruelty, discrimination and economic literacy. Far from abandoning his assault on the disabled, Starmer's merely repackaged it. What we now witness is not a compromise, but a con, a sleight of hand that introduces a two-tier system in which the disabled are pitted against each other, depending on when they fall ill or become disabled. And this is something we should all be mindful of. You might not be sick or disabled today, but any of us could become so through no fault of our own in future. This is austerity wrapped in spin, a sham dressed up as reform, and a betrayal of the very principles Labour once claimed to stand for, supposedly there for working class people, whether in work or not. And many of those affected will be people in work. These changes may even put them out of work. At the heart of Starmer's latest proposal is a timeline. From November 2026, new claimants of the health element of universal credit, UC, and personal independent payment, PIP, will face tighter eligibility criteria and potentially receive less financial support than current claimants. Those already on PIP or receiving health-related UC will be spared, for now, and that's a point I'll come back to in a moment. But this supposed concession is no act of mercy. It's a calculated creation of a discriminatory two-tier system where the date you become ill determines your right, in effect, to a dignified life. As the Scotsman has noted, Labour's policy creates a two-tier disability system that defies basic fairness and justice. Imagine two people with the same disability. This is an example that doesn't really happen in real life. Every case of disability is individual, but just bear with me for the example. They have the same medical history, the same barriers to work. One gets full support because they fell ill in 2025, while the other, who becomes sick a year later, gets less. One of them might be able to get enough PIT to stay in work, therefore. The other, perhaps not, and then becomes unemployed. Therefore, this is not reform. This is discrimination based on a timeline, not on need, plain and simple. The cruelty is not merely in the proposed cuts, but in the design that structurally embeds injustice into the welfare state. If passed, the plan could see thousands of newly disabled people receive as much as £6,000 less per year than someone in identical circumstances who simply became disabled a year earlier. To deflect criticism, Labour has promised a ministerial review, though, so that's all right then, isn't it? Well, no, it's not. A ministerial review of the PIP reforms is not an independent inquiry. This is Labour grading their own cruelty, and it would surprise nobody if they turned around and gave themselves an A, would it? As Disability News Service, DNS, has reported, the Department for Work and Pensions, or DWP, under both Tory and Labour leadership, has a dismal record of transparency and trustworthiness. Any meaningful review must be independent and robust, not handed over to the very ministers proposing the cuts. The DWP's refusal to publish reports linking welfare reform to deaths of disabled people has not changed either. The only thing that has actually changed is the colour of the rosette of the politicians overseeing this misery. Stephen Timms, the Labour DWP minister, misled Parliament by claiming greater transparency had been brought in under Labour. In reality, the department continues to shield data related to deaths and harm from public scrutiny. The promise of review is meaningless when those conducting it are the very same people with every interest in validating this appalling policy. Starmer's team is attempting to also soften the blow with a £1 billion employment support package. Support is supposedly to help people into work. But we're not talking about working age means-tested benefits here, are we? What's being cut here? In the case of PIP, certainly, because you can claim that no matter what you earn, whether you are in work or not, no matter what you actually get paid, it's not means-tested. You get it based on additional needs which come at additional costs. Many new claimants of disability benefits cannot work, but for those that can, these cuts could literally put them out of work, placing a barrier to work in front of them instead of actually helping them continue to access work. These employment costs are related to their conditions. It can cover the cost of transport, of the carers, of therapy they need, of accessible equipment put in the workplace. Therefore, cutting it makes access to work harder, not easier. So who exactly is this £1 billion supposed to benefit then? Because clearly it's not the disabled. Certainly not the newly disabled. It's likely to be funneled into schemes that ignore the structural barriers disabled people face, just as past DWP job support schemes have been slammed for being unfit for purpose. Originally, Labour's reforms aimed to save £5 billion. With the so-called climbdown, savings now amount to around £1 billion. So in savings terms, this is a big cut then. These are the concessions, if that word can ever be used to apply here, in the strict sense that it's being used in this context. But only because this is the sort of thing you can't keep cutting as well. And these figures bear that out. But even this diminished goal is a false economy. Cutting benefits reduces spending power amongst the poorest people who spend what they get in local economies. The government's own figures show that disabled people are more likely to spend their benefits on essentials, rent, food, transport, getting to work if they can, meeting the needs of their disabilities because they're more expensive. Keeping money circulating in local high streets, in local economies as that does. Starmer's policy strips this economic activity out of those local areas, weakening already struggling communities. And to plug the shrinking fiscal gap, Labour whispers about borrowing or cuts elsewhere or tax rises as to how they'll have to get around this. What remains permanently off the table in these conversations? What is the answer to literally all of this, removing any need for any talk of disability cuts? A wealth tax, of course, isn't it? Labour's refusal, even now, to consider taxing Britain's wealthiest individuals a tiny bit more, despite widespread public support for that, shows exactly where its priorities lie. Not with the many, but with the few. PIP fraud is effectively zero. According to the DWP's own figures, the rate of fraud in PIP is just 0%. Yet Labour continues to frame its reforms, keep using that blasted word, even though it isn't fit, as addressing a supposed abuse of the system. This narrative is not only dishonest, it's dangerous. It feeds ableist tropes that see disabled people as lazy or malingering or getting something for nothing. I know such and he's on the take. We read that on social media all the time. We hear it on the high street. There's apparently a massive shortage of assessors for these PIP assessments right now. If only they could recruit all of these learned judges within our societies, eh? It's a nonsense, and they need to stop reading the Daily Mail or watching the BBC. And as much as I bash mainstream media on this channel, The Independent, I have to say, has actually done quite a good piece, noting that Labour is weaponising stereotypes about neurodivergent and mentally ill people to justify cuts. This is social policy based on suspicion, not on fact. But what makes this betrayal particularly grotesque is Starmer's own history. His mother lived with Still's disease, a rare and disabling condition. His brother was also disabled, recently passed away. He has spoken publicly about the challenges his family faced, and yet he now uses those experiences as rhetorical shields, justifying his attack on disability support by claiming his personal understanding of that, when actually he's learnt nothing of his personal understanding. He's learnt nothing from that. This is political theatre that rivals what David Cameron used to do when he used to invoke his late son Ivan to defend Tory austerity in the years before as well, when he was Prime Minister. If they choose to weaponise such personal stories that should elicit sympathy in these cases, what should happen is they should be slammed for their brazen shamelessness. In 2016, Starmer stood in Parliament and called Tory disability cuts morally reprehensible. But in 2025, he's doing the same thing, only worse. At least with the Tories, they made no pretence of compassion. That is the Tory way, after all. Starmer, being the Labour right, however, wants to be cruel and be congratulated for it instead. The reaction from advocacy organisations has been damning, from Scope to Disability Rights UK, to Citizens Advice, they've all condemned these moves, these reforms. They highlight the disproportionate impact the changes will have on younger disabled people, particularly those turning 18 and being moved from Disability Living Allowance, DLA, which is what disabled children currently get, to PIP. Because no matter how severe their condition, these young adults could end up facing reduced support simply for reaching adulthood. The economic, social, and emotional cost of these reforms will be profound. For many, PIP is the difference between isolation and inclusion, between stability and crisis. The revised plan still risks plunging tens of thousands into poverty. The entire plan stinks. Starmer's U-turn was designed to head off a Labour backbench revolt. Nothing more, nothing less. These concessions, as they're being put, were done for his interests only. And to some extent, it's worked too, unfortunately. The MP Meg Hillier has withdrawn her reasoned amendment, the amendment that 120 MPs had signed up to. And some MPs appear to have been mollified aside from her. Fools, every last one of them. Nevertheless, dissatisfaction remains high. Over 120 Labour MPs did initially signal their willingness to rebel. They're going to have to find another way to do that, and they may have to put their names to another amendment now. Many are now under pressure to keep reconsidering, though, especially as new analysis makes clear that the fundamental structure of the bill is completely unchanged. For others, the whips are now apparently resorting to, at least in one case, shouting at MPs, demanding they back this bill now, even in one instance, apparently reducing an MP to tears. The Labour right really are the most vile people I've ever encountered. But there's still a pathway to defeating the bill. If enough MPs recognise this is not a meaningful climb down, but a cynical repackaging of the same austerity that will still harm the lives of thousands of people. If the bill fails, Starmer could end up facing a no-confidence motion, possibly. There's open speculation about regime change needed at the top of the party. Some are calling for the removal of Morgan McSweeney, Labour's campaign chief and Starmer's chief string puller. That would leave Starmer up a certain creek without a paddle. But above all else, this policy is rooted in ableism from start to finish. Therefore, it violates humanitarian law. It punishes people not for what they do, but for when they fall ill. It institutionalizes inequality. It says that newly disabled people are less deserving of support than those already receiving help. This is not only unjust, it's a breach of human rights. Voting for this bill in any form is an endorsement of an ableist policy. Every MP who does so must be held accountable, therefore, for their ableism. And the cruelty doesn't stop with new claimants. Current PIP recipients are reassessed regularly. If they lose eligibility, even temporarily, and reapply after November 2026, will they then be treated as new claimants under the new rules? This is the point I said I was going to come back to. That's not been made clear. Thus, even those protected today could, in theory, be thrown into the lower tier in the near future. This bill must be pulled in its entirety. It is not salvageable. No amount of tweaks or concessions can erase the fact that it is built on cruelty, discrimination, and deceit. If Labour wants to genuinely support disabled people, it should fund services adequately, ensure assessments are fair, and crucially tax the rich to pay for a humane welfare state. If you're reading this, or you're listening to this, watching this, and think it doesn't concern you, then think again. Disability is not rare. One accident, one illness, one twist of fate can make anyone reliant on this very system that Starmer is now seeking to dismantle. If numbers are rising that £1 billion spending might be better used to address the reasons for that and deal with them, wouldn't it? But if we don't defend the rights of the disabled today, it could be us tomorrow. And that safety net may not be there for us, should we be unfortunate enough to need it. It's not about savings. This is not even about work. This is about who we are as a society. And right now, the message from Keir Starmer is loud and clear. If you're sick, if you're disabled, if you're poor, you're on your own. For more on how this could be a fatal mistake for Keir Starmer career-wise, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.